The volcanic eruption of Thera was the most devastating natural catastrophe that took place in the Bronze Age Aegean. The consequences of this event were severe, especially economically, and the most damaged was the most dominant power of the age, the Minoan Civilization of Crete. The archaeologists have traditionally dated the eruption to 1500 BCE. However, the more recent radiocarbon dating suggests an earlier date, ranging from about 1600 to 1550 BCE. Either way, it's clear that this catastrophe did not wipe out the Minoan civilization. What it did achieve, though, was that it dealt a huge blow to the Minoan economy, disrupted their trade, and compromised their hegemony over the Aegean Sea. The most profiting from this event were the Achaeans of the Greek mainland. Although they were not without consequences, they did not suffer as severely as the Cretans did, and what was a great misfortune for the Cretans eventually became a big fortune for the Achaeans. In this video, we will cover the rise of the Achaeans, their domination of the Greek mainland, their expansion to the Aegean islands, and ultimately the conquest of the Minoan Crete. WanaxTV is a channel that walks you through the history of the Achaeans, from the early Greek Bronze Age settlements through their expansion, conflicts with the Minoan Crete, the Hittite Empire, the legendary Trojan War, and the great events of the Heroic Age, all the way through to the classical Greece, the Achaean League, and the wars against the Roman Republic. Please consider subscribing and sharing the video, as this is a one-person production and it greatly helps the visibility of the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. According to the traditional accounts, the early 15th century BC king of the Achaeans, Sthenelus, was succeeded by his son Pelasgus Gelonor. During this time, the Achaeans have already been sending their first colonies to those Aegean islands where the Minoan power was diminishing. Although still very powerful and influential, the Minoan kings of Knossos were not the hegemons of the Aegean Sea that they once were. The competition from the Achaeans was ever increasing, and that would especially become the case with the new ruling house emerging in Argolis. This new dynasty were the Danaids, named so after their eponymous chief Danaeus. It is unknown if the final king of the Inachid dynasty, Pelasgus Gelonor, had any children that would succeed him. Name Gelonor actually meant laughter and was used for King Pelasgus in plays, poems, and stories because he had initially laughed upon being suggested to name Danaeus as his successor, but ultimately he did so, allowing Danaeus to become the new king, founding his own dynasty. Danaians became one of the common names by which the Achaeans called themselves. This was most prominently featured in Homer's Iliad, where the term Danaians was commonly used to designate all of the Greeks, together with the synonymous words Achaeans and Argives. It is from the beginning of the Danaian period that the Achaeans started to assert their hegemony over the most of the other palatial centers of the mainland Greece. However, things at home were not yet stable, as newly crowned Danaeus already had numerous enemies, and it was just a matter of time he had his consequences. His son-in-law, Lynceus, was the main figure of the opposing side, having previously lost his brothers at the hands of Danaid. After apparently getting widespread support, Lynceus grew strong enough to go after Danaid and take justice in his own hands. Among people supporting Lynceus was his son and a very capable general, Abbas. While in some of the accounts it was Lynceus who took the crown from Danaid and subsequently killed him, in other versions it was Abbas leading the army, defeating and killing Danaid and then informing his father of victory. Either way, Abbas was rewarded the shield of Danaid, sacred to goddess Hera, while his father Lynceus was crowned the new king of the Achaeans. It was only then that everything was stable enough domestically that the Achaean hegemony over the Greek mainland could be put in motion. Athens, which had been inhabited by Pelasgians, Achaeans, and fractions of other several tribes, was under the Achaean influence from early on, but during this time it were the Achaeans that became the politically dominant factor in Attica. Those years were very turbulent in Athens, with different rulers deposing each other in an everlasting struggle for power. Amphictyon, the autochthonous ruler, had come to power by deposing the previous king. He himself was eventually driven out by another prince whose name was Erichthonius. It is unknown whether or not the kings of Mycenae had anything to do with this, but it was approximately this time that Athens started manifesting significant and increasing Achaean features. It quickly became a part of the Achaean sphere, with medium-sized Mycenaean palace center installed on the site of the Athenian Acropolis. This apparent change was not watched idly from the neighboring cities that were also previously independent. The city of Eleusis under King Keleos entered a war against Athens. Eleusis was a major center of goddess Demeter, where the Eleusinian mysteries were held every year, a famous festival that continued from the Mycenaean age all the way into the Roman Greece. Erichthonius of Athens ultimately came out victorious, and King Keleos was slain. It wasn't until the next generation that Eleusis was finally subjugated by the Athenians, but the Achaeans were already having Attica under their sphere of influence. Similarly to other palace centers, Athens was never completely annexed or directly controlled from Mycenae, instead having their own local rulers, but nevertheless it was a part of the Mycenaean world, a proto-confederation led by the high kings of Mycenae. In Argos, Lynceus was succeeded by his son Abbas, by now already an established military general, respected and feared on the field of battle. It didn't take long for Abbas to continue the policy of expansion and conquest. After consolidating power at home and possessing military access through Attica and Boeotia, Abbas gathered his army and marched to Phocis, where a number of cities were quick to submit to him already. Boeotia seemed like a trusted ally rather than a subjugated state, as Thebes was a major Achaean palace center traditionally attributed to a powerful Cadmean dynasty. Few generations earlier, the Cadmeans had already defeated Hyantes, the original inhabitants of Boeotia. Cadmeans carried on to occupy Thebes regions for themselves and pushed the Hyantes out into eastern Phocis. Now, decades later, Abbas was in Phocis to completely defeat and subjugate the old tribes. He went largely unopposed, but eastern Phocis had to be taken by force. The main city of the Hyantes was called Hymopolis, surrounded by largely isolated and pastoral land. The terrain advantage ultimately did not help the tribesmen, as Abbas scored a decisive victory, putting Phocis firmly under the Achaean control. As the terrain of Greece in general was not suitable for a sustained direct control and therefore made it almost impossible to just go around and completely conquer the enemies, Greeks had tendency to found colonies that would eventually control the area and maintain friendly relations with their mother cities. Therefore, Abbas decided to follow the suit and founded a colony himself called Abai. This town would grow into an important city in Phocis, having an oracle of Apollo Abios. King Abbas, however, did not stop in Phocis but proceeded further north to Aeolia. After defeating Pelasgians there, Abbas founded another colony called Argos Pelasgion, an area around Phthia on the border to the later Thessaly. It may have been from this time that Achaeans constituted the main populace of the area. Later, they would be among the army led into the Trojan War by Achilles, together with his Myrmidons and others. After defeating the remaining tribes and establishing a colony in Aeolia, and with the rest of the region secured by an allied Achaean palace of Iolcos, virtually all of the mainland Greece was now firmly under the Achaean control or influence. The stage was finally set for the showdown with the former thalassocracy of the Aegean Sea, now a declining power ready for the taking, the Minoan Crete. It is difficult to say which Achaean ruler, if any, should get the most credit for the conquest of Crete, since it generally wasn't attested by the ancient writers, and Abbas was clearly said to have colonized Phocis and Aeolia. If he was the one waging a war on Crete, it would have been certainly attested, at the very least through the myths and legends. Another problem is that the writing system of the Minoans, the linear A script, remains undeciphered to this very day. What does remain likely is that Cretans used the name Minos for their rulers. This name is frequently featured in the Greek mythology and traditions, attesting at least two rulers of Knossos. It's possible that Minos was originally a name later used as a title, like Caesar, for example. So first, let's assess the island of Crete. It is a very big island, one of the biggest in the Mediterranean, and therefore it wasn't easy to control it directly from a single city. Similarly to the Mycenaean Greece, the Minoan Crete had a system of palace centers, which was actually one of the things that Achaeans picked up from the Minoans in the past. Knossos was the capital palace of the island, the biggest and the wealthiest city, probably in all of the Aegean. The far western part of the island was not easily reached by land and was protected by mountains. The two palaces controlling the western part of the island were Zakros and Roussolakos. The main palace on the southern coast was Phaistos, while other important centers on the island were Hagia Triada, Malia, Gurnia, and Miletus. The more famous Miletus on the coast of the Asia Minor was also founded by the Minoans and named after this Miletus. One would assume that the Minoans would be able to completely recover from the past century's Thera eruption, but there was another important event that significantly impacted the situation. In 15th century BCE, a devastating earthquake hit the island of Crete, destroying many of its palace centers, with the most notable exception of Knossos and few others that were also damaged but generally remained largely unaffected. This earthquake once again greatly reduced the power of the Minoans, who had previously already lost the hegemony of the Aegean islands. So in general, these natural disasters, combined with the fact that the Achaeans significantly grew in power and were now willing to confront the Minoans throughout the Aegean, made it inevitable that sooner or later Crete would need to either attack the Greek mainland or be attacked. Greeks of the Mycenaean age were well known for their colonization campaigns. One thing to know about those campaigns is that the colonizers would sometimes become independent from their mother city or mother kingdom. They would not be under any kind of direct control by the original homeland and would usually lose their citizenship, instead becoming bound to the colony, their newfound home. The colonies would typically maintain friendly relations with the mother cities, often through formal alliances and special trade agreements. The Achaeans, being renowned for colonizing the region, already had a number of Aegean islands under their control by the time Knossos was left as the only remaining powerful center of Crete. With many of the Minoan palaces across the island heavily damaged or even destroyed, the rulers of Knossos found it very difficult to maintain control of the whole island. Ready or not, the kings in Knossos were facing not only the powerful kings of the Greek mainland, but the Achaean colonists with their armies and followers semi-independently attacking what was left of the already declining Minoan palaces. While Knossos was certainly well defended and still possessed a fleet big enough to at least defend the city, it was not where the Achaeans would usually attempt to attack. The western part of the island was not as well defended, and the far west was inhabited by the Kidonians, the autochthonous inhabitants of the island, different from the Eteocretan Minoans, who were at this point in time left to themselves. The long coastal space between Kydonia on the west and Knossos was lightly protected at best and served as a perfect spot for the invaders to land. Ancient Greek traditions mention a figure named Tekamos or Texiphos, who led the Greek colonists to the island of Crete and eventually succeeded in defeating the Eteocretans. He sailed from Aeolis, leading a contingent consisting of Achaeans, Pelasgians, and Dorians. Prior to the fall of the Minoan Civilization, a seemingly Greek language was attested on linear A-styled tablets. This was before the linear B script was introduced for the Greek language and likely represented an early attempt of the Achaeans to record their language using a foreign script. These tablets were found at Agia Triada, a former palace center in the neighborhood of Phaistos in southern Crete. The valley of Mount Ida leads directly from the mentioned coast in the northwest to the cities of Agia Triada and Phaistos in the south. A very vulnerable area for the Minoans was certainly something that the Achaeans would take advantage of. One by one, the unprotected Minoan cities were defeated, and it was just a matter of time the capital city of Knossos would fall as well. Minoans now had to protect different paths to the city as well as a possible attack from the sea. Achaeans, being renowned warriors, highly reputed on the battlefield, were much superior to the Minoans on land. At about 1450 BCE, Knossos, the wealthiest and the most powerful city of the Minoan civilization, fell to the Achaean army. After centuries of domination and hegemony, the Minoan civilization was finally defeated and in ruins. The linear A script of the Minoans was now replaced by the heavily influenced linear B of the Achaeans, and the city of Knossos once again prospered, but this time as a Mycenaean palace center, the main base of the new Achaean power on Crete. Crete now became a close ally of Mycenae, quickly establishing itself as one of the main centers of the Mycenaean civilization. The Aetio-Cretans, the original Minoan inhabitants of the island, continued to freely exist throughout Crete, from Knossos, where they served as a middle and lower class under the Achaeans, to other cities such as Dreros and Prysos, which they were allowed to hold on their own under the influence and oversight from the capital. While these events did not mark the definite end of the Minoan civilization, they definitely ended the Minoan independence and allowed the new power, the Mycenaeans, to control and dominate the Aegean Sea to an even greater extent than the Minoans were ever able to. In some of the next episodes, we will cover the Achaean expansion into Anatolia and subsequent conflicts with one of the truly great powers of the Bronze Age, the Hittite Empire. Please consider subscribing and sharing the video, as it greatly helps the channel and allows our content to be visible to more people. This was WanaxTV, and we'll see you again soon.